The week began with the US bombing Iran's nuclear facilities, but now the US is aiming for talks with Iran. Iran's foreign minister, though, has put an spanner in the works, saying that no immediate negotiations are on the table as of now. Meanwhile, a ceasefire brokered by President Trump between Iran and Israel continues to hold. Israel's attack has left Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile programs damaged, but Tehran's regime continues to stand. As far as the path ahead, President Trump had earlier said that talks with Tehran are possible as early as next week, but Iran says that's certainly not the case.
I'll tell you what, look, we're going to talk to them next week with Iran. We may sign an agreement. I don't know. To me, I don't think it's that necessary. I mean, they had a war, they fought. Now they're going back to their world. I don't care if I have an agreement or not.
نه هیچ توافقی الان برای شروع مجدد مذاکره صورت نگرفت. من به صراحت عرض می‌کنم نه قراری گذاشته شده، نه قولی گذاشته شده، نه اصلا صحبتی ما کردیم برای شروع مجدد مذاکره.
All right, let's get you more on what's next between the United States and Iran. We're joined by Nicholas Hopton, who has served as British ambassador to Iran and other Middle East countries. Ambassador Hopton, thank you very much for your time here on Washington Watch. Now, if these talks happen, I understand that Iran, of course, clearly saying, as we mentioned earlier, that these talks are not likely, at least not next week, but Trump saying otherwise. So if these talks were to happen, who would exactly have the upper hand?
Well, obviously, the US is in a very strong position. The Iranians welcomed the ceasefire. I think they were in a position where the conflict was not going their way. And maybe on the Israeli side, the ceasefire was slightly less welcome because they hadn't achieved any of the stated objectives that Prime Minister Netanyahu had set out for the Israeli action. I think the US, having brokered that ceasefire, having with Qatari help, obviously, and others helping to create that choreographed denouement, which allowed both sides to accept a ceasefire on Monday night. Well, I think the US is in a strong position. But at the same time, the Iranians will feel that they still have enough to negotiate with.
Ambassador Hopton, CNN source-based report says that the US is offering several incentives so Iran does negotiate. For example, a civilian nuclear program for energy usage that could be funded by Arab countries. There's also talk of the US easing sanctions. In your opinion, what's going to really do it for Tehran to come to the table?
Well, the primary objective for the Islamic regime is always its own survival. So negotiating a deal which will be achieved between the US and the Islamic Republic essentially gives some support to the existence of the continued existence of the Islamic Republic. So that's one incentive. A further incentive is, of course, it removes the immediate threat of a resumption of hostilities. And we saw how the Israeli and then with the US support side was so much stronger than anything the Iranians could put together. And they in Tehran and in Iran, I think Iranians have been a bit shocked by the vulnerability and the weakness of their lack of air defenses, and their military might was seen to be a bit of a paper tiger in comparison to the might of Israel and the US. So I think the Iranians will be looking for a deal which supports the continued existence of the regime. They will be prepared to pay a price for that, I would imagine. And of course, they will want to see an easing of sanctions, which will allow their economy to develop again, to trade with not only with those countries like China, to whom they're selling already a lot of oil, but with other countries in Asia, Europe, and possibly, if the deal develops in the way it seemed to be shaping up to before this latest conflict, there might be the lifting of primary sanctions in the US if President Trump is able to get that through the US Congress.
Right now, you've been a diplomat in the Middle East for several years. The question here is, who is really best placed to bring about lasting or at least some sort of stability in the region at this point in time?
Well, I think the US has just demonstrated that they do. They remain the world's only real superpower. They do need to work well with their partners, and that hasn't always been the case under President Trump's administration. But I'm very pleased to see the outcome of the NATO summit this week, which seems to demonstrate renewed US engagement with its closest partners, including the United Kingdom. And my hope is that this now is the beginning of a new phase where we will see a much more cooperative partnership approach coming out of the White House than we have seen at times, perhaps over the last few months, less confrontational, more facing challenges together, including in the Middle East. But at the end of the day, we need US leadership, strong, consistent US leadership. And I think countries in the Middle East would welcome that too, so that we can stabilize the region. And that will be good for the people of the Middle East, all the countries there, but also for the rest of the world as well.
Nicholas Hopton, thank you very much indeed. That was the former ambassador to Iran from the United Kingdom.